Howdy, y'all, and welcome back to the Prying Colloquy, a podcast that's always looking for new insights into ourselves, our relationships, and the world around us. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something that I know is on the minds of a lot of parents these days.
Yeah.
Screen time and child development.
Right.
Now, we're going to be looking at a fascinating study that was recently published in JAMA Pediatrics.
Yes. This study followed over 7,000 children in Japan.
Wow.
And what makes it so interesting is it breaks down the effects of screen time on very specific developmental areas, and it follows these kids for years.
And to help us break down this study, we have an expert with us today.
Yeah.
Now, this study tracked these kids' screen time at age 1 and then assessed their development at ages 2 and 4 using something called the ASQ3.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. The ASQ3 is a standardized questionnaire that measures 5 key areas of child development.
Okay.
So you've got communication, you've got gross motor skills like walking and running, fine motor skills like using their hands, problem-solving skills, and personal and social skills.
Okay.
And this gives researchers a much more detailed understanding of what exactly is being affected by screen time.
So instead of just looking at development in a really general sense, this study was able to zero in on these specific areas.
Exactly.
Which is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Now, most of us know that too much screen time probably isn't a good thing for kids.
Right.
But what did this study actually find?
Well, the biggest takeaway is that the children who had more screen time at age 1 were more likely to have delays in communication and problem-solver skills. And these delays were still apparent when they assessed the children again at age 4.
So we're talking about potential long-term consequences here.
Yes, precisely. And what makes these findings even more compelling is that the study actually discovered a dose-response relationship.
Okay.
Essentially, what they saw was that the more screen time these children had at age 1, the greater their risk of developmental delays.
And I understand there was a specific threshold where the researchers really started to see the most significant delays.
That's right. Children who had 4 or more hours of screen time a day at age 1 showed the most pronounced delays in both communication and problem solving.
4 hours?
Yeah.
That's a pretty significant amount of screen time for a 1-year-old. And I know what you're all thinking. Completely eliminating screen time is pretty unrealistic for most families these days.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the authors of the study acknowledge that it's not about inducing panic or making parents feel guilty. It's about empowering families to make informed decisions.
So it's not necessarily about avoiding screens altogether, but more about understanding the potential risks and finding ways to mitigate them.
Exactly.
What were some of the other things that stood out to you in this study?
Well, one thing that surprised me was how strongly and persistently screen time seemed to affect those 2 areas, communication and problem solving.
Okay.
While previous studies have suggested a connection, the strength of the correlation found in this study was quite significant.
So this research really adds to the growing body of evidence that early screen time can have a lasting impact on how children develop these essential skills.
Yes, exactly. And that's what makes this particular research so important. You know, one thing that the study wasn't able to do was to distinguish the type of screen time these children were exposed to. Like, was it primarily educational programming, entertainment, or a combination of both?
That's a really important point because I think most of us would agree that there's a big difference between a 1-year-old watching an educational show versus one that's just passively watching cartoons.
Exactly. And that's where future research needs to go.
Yeah.
We need to better understand how the content of that screen time might be influencing its impact on child development.
So for parents who are listening to this and thinking, okay, what does this all mean for me?
Right.
What are some practical takeaways from this study?
Well, I think the first thing is to remember that it's not about being perfect. No parent can completely eliminate screen time, and that's okay. It's about making informed decisions and finding a healthy balance.
Right. So instead of panicking, let's focus on empowering parents with some practical advice.
I agree. And there are some excellent resources available to help parents navigate this. Like, for example, the American Academy of Pediatrics has recommendations for screen time based on a child's age.
Okay.
For children under 18 months, they recommend avoiding screens altogether except for video chatting.
Yeah.
And for toddlers, they suggest limiting screen time to an hour a day of high-quality programming, preferably watched together with a parent.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by high-quality programming?
Absolutely. High-quality programming is content that engages children, teaches them new concepts, and encourages them to think critically.
Okay.
So interactive shows programs that introduce new vocabulary and content that sparks curiosity and imagination would all fall into this category. The key is to avoid passive screen time where children are simply zoning out in front of the screen.
So it sounds like it's not just about the amount of screen time, but also the quality of the content and how they're actually engaging with it.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's also important for parents to think about how screens are being used within the family.
Okay.
So instead of using screens as a constant distraction or a babysitter,
Right.
try to make them a part of quality time together.
Okay.
Watch a show as a family, talk about it afterward, and maybe even do an activity that's related to what you watched.
Yeah.
These shared experiences can really help turn screen time into valuable learning opportunities.
That's a great point. Screens can be a tool for connection and learning when they're used intentionally, but we also need to remember that children learn best through interactions with people.
Right.
Through play and through exploration of their environment.
Absolutely.
So even though screens can be a part of a child's life, we want to make sure they don't dominate it.
I think that's a really important message for parents to hear. We want children to develop those essential communication and problem-solving skills, and the best way to do that is by providing them with opportunities to practice those skills in real-world settings.
Now, this study focused on children in Japan. Do you think these findings are applicable to children in other parts of the world?
That's a great question. While the study was conducted in Japan, I think the findings are likely applicable to children in other developed countries with similar levels of access to technology.
Okay.
Of course, more research is always needed to confirm this, but given what we know about child development and the impact of screen time, it's reasonable to assume that these findings have broader implications.
So this research has the potential to impact not just individual families, but also policymakers, educators, and anyone who's involved in creating the environments where children grow and develop.
Precisely, this research should be a springboard for broader conversations about how we can best support healthy child development in a digital age.
Yeah.
It's not just about demonizing screen time. It's about understanding its potential impact, both positive and negative, and then making informed choices.
It's a much bigger conversation than just saying screen time is bad.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that technology is here to stay and figuring out how we can harness its power to enhance children's lives while mitigating the potential risks.
And that's a conversation worth having. Well, folks, we've covered a lot of ground today in our exploration of screen time and child development. Big thanks to our expert for sharing their insights with us. Now, we've explored some really thought-provoking research today, but before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with something to ponder. How can we as parents, as educators, as a community, use this information to create a digital world that is truly supportive and enriching for our children?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I believe it all starts with awareness.
Okay.
We need to be aware of the potential downsides of too much screen time.
Okay.
But we also need to be aware of the potential benefits that technology can offer when it's used thoughtfully and intentionally.
It's all about finding that balance, that sweet spot where technology enhances our lives without hindering healthy development.
Right. And this research can be a catalyst for that conversation.
Yeah.
It can empower us to move beyond just saying no to screens and start thinking about how we can say yes to a digital world that actually fosters creativity, connection, and learning.
Oh, what a fantastic point.
Yeah.
Instead of viewing technology as the enemy, let's challenge ourselves to see it as a tool that can help us create a more vibrant and engaging learning environment for our children.
I love that perspective. There's so much potential there.
Well, folks, we've reached the end of our deep dive for today. I hope this conversation has given you some food for thought and maybe even inspired you to make some changes in your own homes and communities. If you'd like to delve deeper into this topic, you can find a link to the full study in our show notes. And be sure to tune in next time for another fascinating exploration of the world around us.
Until then, keep prying and never stop learning.